that you have your cameras turned off and your microphones muted. That's the most important thing, unless you want to see what's going on in your living room and what you're doing and all that good stuff. Again, as you come into the room, please make sure you have your camera turned off and your microphone muted before we get started here. Just give everybody a moment to come to the room. My name is Ahmed Dents. Welcome to We Are Listening. Again, as you come into the room, I just want to make sure that you have remember to turn your camera off. Make sure you have your microphone muted. And if you have the prowess on Zoom, to make sure you choose to hide all non-video participants. And I'll just give it just a couple of more moments for everybody to get on in, and then we will get started.
It was going to start with interviews with those two people, and then the directors are going to come on.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Ahmed Dents. I am Development and Artistic Associate here at San Diego Repertory Theatre. Welcome to We Are Listening. This is our bi-weekly live salon where we celebrate the lives, careers, and viewpoints of Black artists, creatives, theater professionals, and workers in performing arts and theater. Again, my name is Ahmed Dents. San Diego Repertory Theatre. We Are Listening is produced by San Diego Repertory Theatre in partnership with La Jolla Playhouse and the Old Globe. Welcome. One more time, I'll say it louder for the people in the back. Please make sure that you have your video turned off and your microphone turned off, and we will get ready to go. I do not do this by myself, so please, right now, let me bring on my co-host for the evening. Please welcome La Jolla Playhouse Artistic Programs Manager and Local Casting Director, Jacole Kitchen. She is always here with me, and this other dude you see on the screen right here, this is the guy you guys never see who helps make this thing go. Please welcome Associate Artistic Director and Director of Arts Engagement for the Old Globe, Freedome Bradley-Ballentine. How y'all doing?
Great, great. My kids let me come out and play with y'all tonight.
We're glad they granted permission. It's so good to have you, Freedome.
For those who watch normally, you always hear me and Jacole talking about the other head of the three-headed monster that you never see. This is the other guy. This is the guy who's always off in the wings. These are my partners in crime. We make up the three-headed monster that is the curation team for We Are Listening. And usually me and Jacole grab the hosting duties, and this guy just sits in the back like Don Corleone and just like he's calling the shot somewhere from home and checks in every once in a while. But he's on with us tonight for this special Nights of Freedom. We appreciate you, and I know the folks appreciate you being here with us tonight, man.
It's great to be here.
This is a really, really great episode, and I want to set the table for how this episode came to be. Again, if this is your first time, we're here every 2 weeks, and we do use this opportunity to celebrate the artistry, the careers, the viewpoints, the journeys of Black creatives, artists, professionals, theater workers in the performing arts. That's what we do every 2 weeks. And we're glad you're here to join us if this is your first time. If you've been with us before, welcome back. Thank you. I just want to real quickly give you a preview of what we got coming up. Coming up in 2 weeks on February 18th, Mr. Dahan Blevins, founder of Urban Warriors and the San Diego Kumbah Fest, will be joining us to actually give a preview of the Kumbah Fest this year, which is going to be presented virtually, coming up in just a few weeks in the last weekend of the month. Also on March 4th, we will have Artistic Director of American History Theater, and she's also Associate Artistic Director for Trinity Theater, Candace Crystal. And on March 18th, we will have Jonathan McCurry, Artistic Director at National Black Theater, and Keith Joseph Atkins, Artistic Director for the New Black Festival. So please come back and join us for those conversations and hear what's going on with these wonderful creative people. You can sign up at the same place you signed up for this, at Eventbrite. You'll see the link if you go back to the page, or head on over to sdrep.org/listening, or visit our Facebook page at sdrep.org. Also, if you have missed any prior episodes of We Are Listening, they are available on San Diego Repertory Theater's YouTube page, La Jolla Playhouse's YouTube page. You can also catch them in podcast form on Spotify and SoundCloud. Now, before I bring my guests on screen, I did want to set the table for this particular episode. And for those of you who this is your first time watching We Are Listening, this show has been born out of the events of last year, a compounding of events. Of course, in reaction to the well-read and published We See You White Theater, of course, in reaction to events of theaters being shut down to the COVID crisis, but also primarily after the murder of George Floyd, and not just George Floyd, but other Black citizens by police officers and citizens in the United States. But the murder of George Floyd was I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Larry Aldridge, our managing director, for telling me I still have my screensaver up. Here we are, if y'all weren't seeing us. After the murder of George Floyd, that was really the match that lit the tinder that was already going on here in the United States and really worldwide. And after that, we saw everybody from theater companies to major corporations putting out statements of solidarity and how things would change in their organizations. And this was actually born out of the idea of Artistic Director for San Diego Repertory Theater, Sam Woodhouse, to put this together, to bring on Black theater artists, creatives, professionals, workers, to give us their viewpoints of what's going on and how they see everything going on in the industry and what needs to change. And that's where this show came from. Now, for those, let's just go ahead and get rid of the elephant in the room that I already saw going on social media. If this is a show about Black artists, why are these three white guys on your flyer? Well, it's very important. These three white guys are artistic directors for San Diego Repertory Theater, La Jolla Playhouse, and the Old Globe. And with this being a partnership of these three theaters, and with me, Jacole, and Freedome being the ones who are curating this, we were kind of becoming the avatars of this, which is fine. But we did realize that there was going to be a necessity, not only in the theater community, but in the general community as well, to bring these three gentlemen on to talk about their views to what's been going on this year, how we move forward in the future, what are their plans for their respective organizations going on in the future, and just their personal outlooks and viewpoints of how we move forward in this. And so that's setting the table for how we got this episode here right now. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring tonight's guests on screen. Please welcome to We Are Listening, Artistic Director for La Jolla Playhouse, Chris Ashley, Artistic Director for the Old Globe, Barry Edelstein, and Artistic Director for San Diego Repertory Theater, Sam Woodhouse. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and welcome to We Are Listening.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure, for sure. Thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. How you guys feeling tonight?
Hey,
Excited to have the conversation.
great place to be.
Doing good.
Time to go. I'm like, let's just jump into it. Let's get into it. Okay. I'm taking over. So Freedome just put in the chat links where you can find all of the statements, action plans, roadmaps that all three of the theaters have put out. So just a preface, we're not going to get into the details of what is in those documents on this call. We're really focusing on the intention behind creating them, and then what is driving us forward. So I want to start with that question for you all. And Chris, I'm gonna throw to you first, because I work for you. So I am just talking about the intention behind creating these plans. And I don't know that even the folks on this call know this, or people who are listening, but the very, very first time, it was right after things just started really heating up, even in town, I got a text from Eric King Louie, and he said, "Hey, we really want to put out a statement. Here's what we've been working on. This is what we want to put out." And he texted it to me. And I said, don't make that statement. You are better off not saying anything than saying that vague bullshit that you just texted me that doesn't actually address anything. And he said, okay. And we went back to the drawing board, and a team of people came together. And so to me, that's the origin story of how all of this came together. But for you, Chris, I would love to hear what the intention behind first the statement, then the action plan was, and who was part of that conversation at the Playhouse.
So I love your origin story. Yeah, it was such a hot moment, and we're still in that moment and that conversation when after the murder of George Floyd and as Ahmed said, kind of lit the match. That conversation happened across the entire staff. All the artists we talk about, our board was talking about it, our audiences were talking about it. It was everywhere. And the question of what you say and leading to what you're going to do was so urgent. And also, as you said, there's so many kind of dangers in saying something boilerplate, or it's the thoughts and prayers for the family kind of approach that just is meaningless, right? So if we're going to say something, how do we say something that is authentic? How do we say something that points toward real progress and change in our institution? And as you said, that it was every sentence we put in front of people, everybody beat it up. And I think in a really healthy way. I think our entire staff, BIPOC artists and white artists and everybody had powerful, urgent opinions, and everybody wanted really quickly arrived at wanting to figure out what is going to help take down barriers of access at La Jolla Playhouse for artists and for staff members and for audiences of color. There was really a feeling like there's some things we're proud of, but there's a lot of work to do at our institution, and this is the moment. Usually I'm sort of new to the Google document thing where everybody's changing the document as you go, but a lot of the language, we had that process, and usually that dumbs the language down. And I really do feel like in the case of the Playhouse, people were bold in a way that I admired. And every time we spend an hour with a paragraph, it would get stronger and bolder and more to the point.
Thank you. I agree completely. And it was really fun seeing Chris's amazement in the Google Doc where everything is changing just instantaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the good things about bringing all of you together, because I know my process that we went through so intimately, but hearing your process over at the Playhouse is really just revelatory. I wanted to ask Sam, because I probably know the least about what happened over there at San Diego Rep. What was some of the process of creating the statements, that you all went through, and with the action plans, with the statements? Who was involved with that over there at the Rep?
Thank you, Freedom. Our statement was drafted by Danielle Ward, who was recently promoted to Associate Artistic Director. A lot of it in response to the manifestos from We See You, White America. And it was further edited by Larry Aldridge and by myself extensively, and reviewed by members of our artistic team. Interestingly enough, it's interesting to hear, Chris, your comment on how important the language itself is in the document, which I of course respect. And I would also posit that the spirit of what we've written is the critical, central thing to pay attention to from my point of view, which is essentially in our version of this action plan is to what does it mean to become a truly diverse, inclusive, anti-racist theater organization? What does that mean? How does one get to that? And that's a fundamental question of what we've created. And then the second tenet is just a commitment to at least 50% representation by BIPOC people across the board. Board members, staff, artists, playwrights, actors, designers. So, That's what we're working on, just at central core mission message.
Barry, what about for you all at the Globe?
Well, you know, I want to start by just, if I can, just sort of step aside for 1 second and just say, you know, I really feel very grateful to be here. I love the title of the show is We Are Listening, and that really is what I've been doing so much. I've been really trying to shut my mouth and listen. Listen to what the community is telling us, listen to what BIPOC artists around the country and BIPOC theater makers are telling us, and listen to what the Black community specifically and the broader BIPOC communities of San Diego are talking about their relationship to the Old Globe, how the Old Globe can be meaningful to them. I've turned down a lot of invitations to sit on panel discussions because I really have felt it's a time for me to listen and not talk. And you know, like my dad always used to teach me, I never learned a single thing when I was talking. So I've been really trying to honor that. And so I just want to start right off by saying that I'm entering into this conversation from a place of humility and you know, my own study of anti-racism is pretty new, and I don't claim to have any answers or anything like that. You know, I'm really stepping into this from the point of view of as humble, you know, many people who know me might find that hard to believe, but as humble a place as I can possibly be with regard to this particular issue. But what I think I should say about the Globe is that the Globe's been on a journey for a long, long time. You know, Craig Knoll, who was the legendary founder of the place, had an idea of community that really resonates with what a lot of the contemporary American theater is thinking about, enfranchisement of the community, equity, ownership of the institution by the whole community. And there were experiments over the years of, you know, Shakespeare in Spanish and early on in the Globe's life, a lot of the local Black and brown theater makers here in San Diego working at the Old Globe. So it's been part of the sort of life of the Old Globe, recognizing that it's in the middle of Balboa Park. It's very central to this sort of civic imagination and civic identity of San Diego. And when I got to the Globe 8 years ago, I just wanted to sort of dig into that work. And there've been a lot of sort of landmarks, milestones along the way. The work that we did with the James Irvine Foundation, which created our arts engagement department, which brought Freedom here from New York and created what is now a multi-million-dollar infrastructure of the Globe, really working in the community, and then a vision and values exercise at the Globe driven by our entire staff. What are the values that the place represents? What do we stand for? And then a strategic plan that was adopted in 2019. And then Freedom and his team talking specifically with the Black theater makers of San Diego, which was in January of 2020, before COVID even shut us down. So there's a lot of work going on around the Globe, trying to make the place more porous, make the place more permeable to non-white BIPOC San Diego in our programming and who's on the staff and who's on the board and in our work across the board. But there's absolutely no doubt that the murder of George Floyd specifically, and the publication of We See You White American Theater enormously, was like putting paddles on a patient, you know? It was that thing that jolted the Globe to life around this work. And I just feel like that context is incredibly important because so many changes have happened so quickly. And it, you know, in the history of American culture, I think it's hard to point to another movement like We See You White American Theater in terms of the power and the impact and the change that it has created so quickly. So I'll take a breath there. We can come back to the Globe specific process, but just feels important to me to say that there's a very, very big context of the Globe trying to do this work, but then a massive acceleration happening from May of 2020. And I guess it was July of 2020 when the We See You demands were published. Can't stress that enough. We would not be having this conversation in the way that we are if it weren't for those two things.
I just need to take a second to shout out the Irvine Foundation and the New California Arts Fund because as Barry mentioned, that's what created the position for Freedom to come over and start the arts engagement department. It's also in large part what created my position over at the La Jolla Playhouse. But I think that one of the, we don't have time to get into this aspect of it all, but the fact that it was grant funds that brought the two of us into the institutions, but that there was staying power. It's not the grants that once that granting was done, it's not like these positions went away. It was very immediate that these positions were folded into the core of the institutions. So I just wanted to put a pin in that.
You're right. And grant funds specifically targeted at enfranchising lower income populations and populations of color, right? This is a very, very, very big part of the story. And you know, we're all grateful to Irvine for that work.
Can I just, somebody in the chat asked a question about work environment for BIPOC artists and staff, and how the theaters are obliging themselves to change if there are parts of their work environment that are toxic. And I super important part of this puzzle. I'd say at the Playhouse, like one of the first things that happened is BIPOC staff members got themselves together and began to share experience of what has it been like to work at the Playhouse's highs and lows. Where is the environment letting them down? And that really at the Playhouse has led to an ongoing conversation about how can we make this environment more productive, more inviting. When we invite artists in, are we really making a home for them? And there's at the Playhouse, there's a new group that's come together called the Accountability and Inclusion Alliance, which is staff members talking to each other and proposing action points for change. And as Barry was talking about listening, allowing the voices of staff members and artists to lead the way toward a better environment in the work seems crucial to me.
Yeah, Freedom, you were going to jump in there?
Well, I was going to say, Barry had spoken about it a little bit, personally preparing and being, a neophyte with some of this anti-racist work. And I was wondering, what if any, Sam, you had spoken about, preparing for this meeting and saying you had 5 pages of notes that you wrote, that people wouldn't see. But that to me spoke to how you were personally preparing for this EDI, this anti-racist work. And I was wondering if Chris or Sam or if one of you all wanted to throw that out there. What were some of the resources that you discovered through this process in preparation?
If I may speak to that, try to do this quickly. I honestly feel my answer to the question begins in 1988 when I was in a grocery store in Golden Hill, and I suddenly was hit in the face that the group of people I saw in that grocery store was much more diverse than the people on our stage or in our audience. And that began a journey that's been going on for me since 1988 that some of you are aware of. We launched Teatro Sin Fronteras in that year with a play in English and Spanish, along with Jorge Huerta, Theater Without Borders. And since then, we produced 55 plays by Latinx writers, about 30 plays by African-American writers. In 1992, we produced a piece called The Life and Life of Bumpy Johnson by Amiri Baraka with music by Max Roach, two of the giants of Black theater and music. And Baraka said to me, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I've never forgotten it. He said, Sam, the difference between you and me is you got to know about you, but I got to know about me and you. And that has stuck with me ever since. And so we at the Rep have had a long history of simply producing plays by writers of color and hiring actors of color. And over the last 8 out of 10 years, about over 50% of the actors on our stages have been actors of color. So that's like a history that brought me to, and here's where I agree with Barry, that what happened with George Floyd and what happened with We See You White American Theater was a slap up beside the head of wake up, and it's time to take the next step. And our next step is being sort of managed and run by what we've called a vision council, is we put together a team of about 7 people in our organization, about half of whom are BIPOC staff members. And this group of people is guiding our work on our strategic action plan. And next week, we start work with Sarah Bellamy, who is the artistic director of Penumbra Theater in Minnesota, that of course you know, I'm sure all of you know,
Yeah.
who's an amazing trainer of what she calls racial healing. So, and this is our complete board, and our complete staff is going to be involved in this training. So that's where we're trying to go right now. And it's just, you know, I mean, for me, it comes from an incredible curiosity about the world and wanting to hear multiple voices in places of power and authority speaking truth, which is what motivates me.
You know, I spent my formative years at the Public Theater in New York, as did Freedom, as did Eric Louie, your colleague, at the Playhouse. And, you know, that's a theater that really is dedicated to the idea that the theater is a public good. The theater is a public asset. Joe Papp called it the public because he wanted it to be like a public library where anybody could come and just participate in the culture. And the place is famous for the pioneering work that it did in inclusion of stories and cultures and artists. And that's been my approach to theater for a long time. When I got to San Diego 8 years ago, I had an experience similar to what Sam just described, which is that the city that I lived in didn't look like what I saw when I went to work at the Globe. And when I saw who was coming to the shows and the shows that we were doing, we've begun changing this work. And the story has been EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The big change for me has been this idea of anti-racism. And I knew the idea a couple of years ago, and I had friends that were doing work in anti-racism. And when George Floyd died and was murdered, that's when, at the time, we had a staff member at the Globe, Travis Ballinger, who was associate artistic director, who said, read How to Be an Anti-Racist. And, you know, it was an epiphany, an awakening for me, because it's about systems. That's the sort of giant thing that I think in my own thinking about this has changed so much, is it's no longer about a moral issue of who's a good person and who isn't a good person. It's about the systems that are in place that perpetuate certain outcomes. And it was a massive kind of revelation, because then you can start to analyze, well, what's actually happening here? Why are the shows looking like they're looking? Why are the people that are getting hired looking like they're getting hired? And Ibram Kendi really asks us to think on a systems kind of basis. And the Globe's social justice roadmap is trying to do that. It's trying to do that. And so we can look at the Globe's past and say, here's where we've fallen short. But it's not about, oh, that happened because of racist individuals who had racist opinions. That's, in a funny way, beside the point. It's about systems that were in place that we can now begin to dismantle, we can now begin to attack. And that's where we are in our work, early in it for sure, but that's the commitment that we're making. To me, it's just massively helpful, and I'm trying to be as quick a learner as I can. I'm faster than some in my organization, slower than many, and, just trying to figure out how to do this work so that we can go about it in a way that's, in a sense, technical, and say, all right, if we change these processes, if we change the kinds of questions that we ask, if we make sure that we're talking about and questioning these following decisions in these following ways, then that's how you can begin to change outcomes. And it's been exciting to be part of, frankly, and in a way, more than in a way, genuinely optimistic, because it feels like something you can actually affect, which is fantastic.
So same question about how to prepare for this work and to take action. Definitely the We See White American Theater document was potent and spurred a lot of conversations at the Playhouse. Definitely, I, like many of us, are a member of many different kind of interlocking communities. And I feel like all of those communities had some form of a training process. At the Playhouse, the Revolve company has been I think several of us are using them, really smart about how to kind of lay out parts of the problem. And also these, like, in 5 productions have come from away, and the Diana Company and the Playhouse and the Directors Union, these Zoom conversations of what has actually people's experience been like in the work process. You know, if you're a BIPOC artist, what have you experienced? And uncovering those experiences, some of which have been talked about and some of which I think have been kind of, those individuals felt like this is not a thing that I'm feel empowered to speak about to the community, like so that there's a kind of weight of evidence of here's what's gone wrong, here's what in our exact community has happened in the last couple of years. So as we start to take action, we're actually solving problems for people and changing dynamics so that that doesn't happen again. And those conversations are so hard and for everybody and so crucial. So I would say that those 40 conversations in a couple of different communities really, for me, have really been the basis of what are we trying to solve for.
I'd like to just ask one question just to follow up with some of this thing, because there's such a power dynamic in arts organizations with artistic directors and how you all function, how you all are perceived within arts organizations, and the deferential treatment that often comes with that. How were you able to make space within this process? How were you able to encourage, opinions that were divergent, that might have been, difficult to hear, and that might not have aligned with past practices? How were you all able to do that? What were some of the practices that you all did?
Well, let me start, Freedom. Look, it's strange to be in this conversation and me doing the talking, because you and I have had an extraordinary partnership going through this work together. I'm so grateful to you for your generosity and your openness, and I try very hard, and you can tell me privately whether I've succeeded or not in not making you carry the load of work that's about the experience of Black artists at the Old Globe. I have felt a real obligation to shoulder that weight as a leader, but I've also felt a very serious obligation, as I said earlier, to just listen and to say, okay, look, the ethos of arts engagement at the Old Globe that you taught all of us, Freedom, in your work here, is to listen, is to go to a community and not say, we're the Old Globe and we're going to come to you and here's what we've got and here's how it's going to make an impact on you. But instead to go to a community and say, what do you need? What do you need from us? How can we help? And early on in this work, we put together a council of community members that was extraordinarily powerful. And, Chris and Sam, I know you had these conversations. The saying to Black San Diegans, please tell me your experiences coming to the Old Globe, was intense, because we heard some things that were really painful, really painful. And I felt the need to express remorse and regret and to apologize and to make a deep commitment that things like this wouldn't happen again. And these were a wide range of things. An anecdote might help, talking to an actor who's at the Globe to be in a show on our main stage, who's a Black man who shows up for work an hour and a half early to sit and read a book on a bench in our plaza in Balboa Park, and a stream of people coming up to him going, can I help you? Can I help you? Is there, are you, and like, the guy's here to star in a show in a half an hour and he's being made to feel unwelcome, right? And we heard stories about interactions with staff, interactions with volunteers, interactions with audience members. And, you listen to that and think something's very wrong here and we've got to take some steps to create a more open and welcoming environment. And again, it has to do with a radical act of listening and a radical act of humility. And you're right that the people who do these jobs tend not necessarily to be so good at that. So the emotional journey of this period for me has been trying to open my heart and say, I'm not going to be the guy who has the answers. It's not going to come top down, but we're going to listen hard and listen to what comes up. And that's been extraordinary. Gift that I really feel grateful for, as painful as it's been.
No. Moving. Oh, go ahead. I'm
Go,
sorry.
no, please.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Think about just making space for it. I mean, I do think that the pandemic created some of the space for it, right? Like people had time on their hands in a way that not in pandemic times, this conversation would have had to fight with much more plates that were much more filled in terms of tasks to do to make the theater go. I also think at the Playhouse, some of what we did from Debbie, our managing director, and I was make space, but more what happened was the staff and the artists had things they wanted to say and they took the space, right? And so it wasn't like trying to convince people to speak because they're not in the habit of it within the power dynamic. I do think that the staff very naturally said, we have to deal with this. Here's what I think. And that's, I think, one of the bright spots of this moment.
I'm glad you said that, Chris, because me and Sam have had this conversation that, this moment that what we're dealing with, especially when we're coming to these conversations of race and inclusion, they are coupled with the pandemic. There is when we look back at this, they are coupled with this the same way as, in the early 70s, the Black Power movement at that time and things at that time were tied intricately with what was going on in Vietnam and the forgotten war that I call it, that my dad served in, the Korean War. These things were attached at the time. And I'm glad you said that. And that kind of leads me into my question. And I preface this with an example that's really powerful that has been just running through my head for weeks in, watching the film adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And the scene where, through this whole thing, Levy's going to do his own thing. He's going to do his own thing. He's going to get his own band. The producer has promised him he's going to get him a band and he's going to, this, that. And it comes to the point to where he gives him a couple of bucks for his songs. And he's like, things change. And down where they're rehearsing, there's this door that Levy swears has never been there before. And he can get out this door. And the whole show, he's going back to this. Whenever he gets frustrated, he's opening this door. And at that moment, when the man just takes his money and tells him basically, we're not going to do it. And Levy goes and he busts through that door. And when he busts through the door, it's just basically a brick closet. And it's just a total dejection of his hope. And the reason why I bring that up is I say it every episode, not just for theater, but for corporations, businesses. We've seen the statements. We saw them put on Instagram and Facebook with the black background and the white or yellow lettering or whatever it was at the time. We've seen the statements. How does this momentum continue? How do these thoughts continue? How do these relationships continue? How do these revelations backed by action continue when the urgency is gone? When people are going back to work because we can relax off of COVID again, and there's audiences back in and money's coming back in and we can do these things and we're back to producing live shows and now even doing which I sure will continue, virtual performances. How do we make sure that this is just not another episode of history where Black folks are going to be saying, yeah, remember when they were, how do we make sure, and when I say me, I mean everybody, how do we make sure that this moment is not just a moment, but that this is a real change and that this continues, like I said, when this sense of urgency dissipates?
Well, if I may, one way is to hold us accountable. I mean, I know that the Globe has announced a season coming up. I read what's in that season. I see the shift towards much more BIPOC representation in the programming. I know that that's what I'm working on. I trust and believe that's what Chris is working on. And I could, we're launching a new Black Voices, new play reading series in a couple of weeks that we've never done before. I hope that becomes annual. I'd like to hire an associate artistic director who's an African-American person. I'd like to do that. We have commitments in our strategic action plan to diversification and to try to spread the power and authority and knowledge out to a wider pool of people in our organization. But we need to be held accountable to ourselves and to each other. And that's partially why this program exists in my mind, and why I'm pleased that we're sharing the partnership with the Globe and the Playhouse, because in a way, this conversation is also about accountability. This conversation tonight, that we're sharing what we hope to do, what we've done, what we want to do. Okay, well, let's see. I believe change will happen, but let's see. Let's pay close attention. Let's keep our eyes open.
Hear, hear.
Let's put the resources into work by BIPOC artists, so they're front and center and at the center of the action, which I believe will happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, Sam. Accountability is what it is. The Globe has made sure that there's a publicness to what we're doing, that they're going to be reporting about what we're doing. There are real resources. You know, I'm grateful to the Globe's board, who made a commitment of really significant resources to jumpstart this work, and I thank them for it. And yeah, that's it. We have to be held accountable, and when we don't achieve something that we said we were going to do, we have to be able to explain why. When we do, we have to be able to point to it and sustain it. And that I do feel like that's different. I do feel like that's different. But again, let me go back to where I started from a very specific point of view. But there does feel like there's something different going on now, because the public nature of the commitments that are being made and the minute nature of the commitments that are being made feel a little different to me.
Oh yeah.
I completely agree with both of you about the accountability part. I think what we program, we're theaters, like what you see on our stage says so much about what the values and mission of the theater is. I would also say who sits in what seats has like incredible power, and how we hire. Like, are we willing to go further than we have a job opening? We'll post it, we'll look through the resumes and we'll pick one. Like, are we going to actually try to open the door, try to recruit a wider, deeper pool for that job? Many theaters are in the process of promoting Black and BIPOC staff members, which is, I think, really healthy. Although, there's all of the issues of does that theater expect those staff members to solve this for them, or are they actually going to respect and give full voice, responsibility, and power to that person? I hope yes. And then there's our jobs. You're looking at three white guys running these three institutions. There's certainly some artistic directors who are sort of said, like, okay, my moment is over and it's time for more diverse leadership. I'm not suggesting that the three of us do that exactly this minute, but I think the question of turnover and inviting new people into the real positions of responsibility at these theaters is part of the answer to how is this going to have real staying power as a movement and a moment of progress.
And Chris, I think that that's the perfect segue into the giant Caucasian elephant that's in the room, because you are not calling for the three of you to step down at this point, but there are a lot of people who, in theory, are. I'm looking to you, Sam, because especially founding artistic directors, you've been at the head of that organization for 40. I left just after the 40th anniversary, so I'm trying to do really quick math, for 44 years. And so there are people who are saying, if you've been in your leadership position at your organization more than 15 years, if you are a founding artistic director and you are a white male, you should step down.
Right.
I would just love to hear what the three of you feel about that, or how, what are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people are calling for it.
I used to say that often, that the most direct way to address these issues at San Diego Rep was for me to quit and to replace me with a person of color. You heard me say it, Jacole. And I've often believed that. And hopefully when I move on, which will be sooner than later, given I've been here plenty of a long time, that a person who comes into my chair will be a person of color. I personally am committed to that. I'm obviously not in control totally, but that's my personal interest and commitment. So yeah, I hear that call, and it makes sense to me. And frankly, we're seeing that in the country. I mean, there's a whole raft of high-level new artistic directors of color that are really making an impact on the field in the last year, actually. And we all seen their conversations, and glad to hear them and see them.
We've seen a lot of this change that's happening, for sure, for certain. But I'm friends with a few of those artistic directors, and my question is, like once we're hiring, this whole change that happens.
Freedom, can we get your volume up a little bit?
Sorry, and we have this whole change of Black BIPOC artistic directors that are sitting there. The real power is with the board. All right. So what are we doing with the boards? How are we making a way for these BIPOC artists to come in, if the people that are sitting in power haven't necessarily been prepared for these conversations? I'm wondering, have you all put any thought to that? Like what are we doing with boards?
So yeah, I will. Let me answer that as directly as I can. A couple things. First of all, in the UK, artistic directors serve a decade and then go. I don't think the National Theatre of Britain has had an artistic director last more than 10 years ever. I think that's probably the same is true of Manchester Royal Exchange, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the big powerhouses in the UK. We just have a different culture here. And I would never say that Zelda Fichandler, who was at the arena stage for 35 years, should have stepped down, or Gordon Davidson at the Mark Taper Forum. These are people who are constantly reinventing themselves and making change and opening doors. But there is a significant cultural difference about the way we go about things here. And so I think these big theaters have a huge role to play in terms of mentorship and developing future leadership. And we see that happen, right? I already mentioned the public freedom, me, Eric, coming from the big public theater to leadership positions in a regional city. And Karen Ann Daniels, who was trained up at the Globe for years, is now in a serious leadership position at the public and will be an artistic director if she so desires, right? So that's the way the ecosystem is set up. But let me come to Freedom's thing. So there's an organization in Wisconsin called 10 Chimneys. It's a theater museum. And one of the things that 10 Chimneys has done during this period is they've convened a series of meetings about anti-racist transformation in the American theater. And they've done something that in my 30 years in this field, I've never seen, which is that they've brought together the leadership, artistic, executive, and board leadership of the 75 biggest theaters in the country. And I've been in these Zoom meetings that could never have happened in the real world because you couldn't have gotten people to get on planes and travel and stay in hotels. And yet there the field was talking about anti-racist transformation. And there's a lot of conversation about boards because power is there. And it's about training, and it's about education. It's about who's on those boards and who gets to be on the board and hold the institution in trust for the community, how long they sit there, and also very importantly and extremely difficult, controversial thing about the power of money on a board versus the power of community on a board, and how to weigh that, right? Is it just wealth that brings power, or are there other community values that need to be represented on one of these big community institutions, and how do we do that? So I will say that in our, as you know, Freedom, in our roadmap, there's a board component to what we're talking about. The entire field is thinking about this. And I think there is a kind of openness, in my experience, right? And speaking for the Globe, there's an openness to thinking about systemic change in a way that we wouldn't have seen before. So I think it might be slow. I don't know, some theaters around the country might be moving faster, but I do think that a sense on the board of a community-based orientation that makes us think about governance in an anti-racist way and power in an anti-racist way is I think going to start to seep into these organizations. I've seen it already, and I think it's going to continue.
I would completely agree with that. This is just a small piece of this, but in thinking about what skill set and who should sit in the seats on our board, one of the things our board just voted to do was to add 5 seats, 3 for artists, 1 for an educator, and 1 for a military aligned person. And those are real opportunities to diversify who's sitting in those seats. So I mean, I think there's not a silver bullet that will solve the question of how do we make boards look more like America and be more diverse and more sort of aware of these issues. But I do think that things like 10 Chimneys, things like really re-examining who's in those seats and how do we make boards like the theater lower barriers to access and make that conversation as vital and as brave as possible.
Yeah, there's also, I think it has to be said, there's immense BIPOC wealth in our city, you know, and I think that's part of this conversation too, is the flow of philanthropy and how it works and what it means and what it's doing in the community. So I really do think that, you know, in every area of our operations, all 3 of our theaters, we're going to start seeing a systemic, deep-seated change. And the whole question of philanthropy is part of that.
And to the question of how are we going to sustain this, boards are going to be part of it, right? I mean, boards are in the life of a theater for decades and decades in a way that administrators and individual artists can flow in and out. And I think the boards are going to be a huge key to sustaining this change.
I think that's something that is not talked about often enough probably in this conversation as far as moving things forward as well is, yes, seats at the table, as it's been said, board, yes, absolutely. But I think that oftentimes we neglect to talk about how much the audience plays in some of this. And I'm thinking somebody had mentioned in the chat, like, oh, blueprints to freedom. And, you know, let's pat ourselves on the back. We've done these things. We're doing them. We're putting on stage. But there's things that I know for a fact that when we did Put Your House in Order at La Jolla Playhouse, a primarily BIPOC, it was a blackity black show. Let's say that. It was a very black show that we put on stage. I know I understand a while ago when you all did The Rainmaker and there was a black Starbuck that was in that, the shock and awe that came from the audience of how dare you take this our classic character and put a black person in there. And the rep, when you, I mean, again, Sam, you're talking about the history that you all have with this, and your audience may be just a tiny bit more progressive than the others, but I can say when we did Honky at the rep, when I was still at the rep and we did Honky, Ahmed had to answer, because he was in the box office, the point. Ahmed was having to answer calls from people saying literally, and I quote, "You wouldn't do a show called Nigger. Why would you do a show called Honky? That's just racist." Right. You know? And so, yes, there is that. We can push, we can do all these things, we can commit, we can hold accountable, but the audience takes a place. So I don't know if this is a risk reward question or just how do you address, because there is going to be pushback. I mean, we've all seen pushback. Even in putting statements out, we got pushback. What, you believe in celebrating BIPOC voices? I'm leaving the theater. Like, these are the reactions that we're getting from people. So I would love to hear how you all are planning and thinking about addressing the pushback that is going to come with all of this, and has come with all of this.
I don't know what you guys are going to say, but I'm going to say, Jacole, if somebody said, "Oh my God, you're putting all these BIPOC artists on stage, I'm leaving the theater, I would say, here's the door, I'll open it for you. You can leave.
That's always been my like that. Okay, there's a bright line, and if an audience member is so far from the values of the theater, maybe this isn't the right theater for you, is one important thing. I also have to say that some of the anti-racism training, I love the concept of working from calling out to calling in. Like, what are techniques to try to actually convince people toward a more progressive stance, and so surely it's a mix of taking a stand and also calling in.
Yeah, I mean, look, we also did a Hamlet where the company was 60-70% Black, and it was the most successful Shakespeare in the history of the Old Globe. So, and one could say, well, Shakespeare, that's a different kind of thing. Yeah. So I don't know. The evidence is mixed at the Old Globe, and at the Old Globe in the past 8 years that I've been there, while there've been exceptions, diverse casting and diverse material has been successful at the box office, and then that creates its own momentum, starts to develop an audience. But I will say this, Jacole, and you know this because you're deeply involved in work in the community. When Freedom first came out here and we were talking, and I said, "Oh, listen, we're going to be able to move super fast in terms of getting work out into the community. First, we're going to have the jet fuel of Irvine. But second, there's just not a lot out there, and you pour a little water on a desert flower and it blooms. And we went from very few community-based constituents to something like 50,000 in just a handful of years. It's amazing how quickly we went. Our audience changed more slowly, because there's a transaction involved of a very expensive ticket and time and coming to the Old Globe as opposed to us going there. So I think one has to accept that there are different timelines here, but what's starting to happen is the things are beginning to overlap. So these community-based constituencies that we're enfranchising in our work are starting to come into the Globe, especially now in this moment of the pandemic. So, we're seeing there's a change taking place for sure. Now, look, some people are going to vote with their feet. I think the very important thing is to make sure that we say to our audiences that just because it's BIPOC doesn't mean it's less than. We know this. The talent in the United States of America is extraordinary, and the thrilling, brilliant work can take place, and then people will get excited about it. I hope, I believe, and other people will say that's not for me, and that's theater. That's theater.
And Sam, just sorry, did you want to say something?
No. Go ahead.
I also, I don't know how you convince big parts of America how to open their hearts and open their minds. But I do think that theater is a self-selecting group. By the time you've had the impulse to walk into a theater, you want to engage with something. And I do think that theater goers can change their minds and embrace new ideas in much greater proportions than the parts of America who I can't understand and don't go to the theater. So that makes me hopeful that the people who want to see theater, I think, are capable of change.
Yeah, I think you're right.
There's a question in the chat. I think the system of subscription models also is a major barrier in diversifying audiences. Have any of you all talked about, trying to change up some of that, some barriers, some of the financial barriers that are affecting people's participation in the theater? I know that's a big giant question, but has anybody put any thought to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Larry Aldrich, our managing director, likes to say you can come to the Rep and pay between $10 and $90. And he's right. There are opportunities to come and see almost everything at a rate that's very, very reasonable, and certainly in the categories of first-run movies. You just have to know how to buy that ticket. Subscription's something else. Subscription is a different animal, and it's I'll let my friends talk about subscription.
I want to make a case for part of what subscription does for theaters, because there's no question that most theaters' subscription bases are less diverse than their single ticket buyers, and that people are more comfortable going into a theater where they see other people who look like them, right? So a not diverse audience, it creates a new obstacle for someone who came in once and may never come again if they don't see themselves sitting in other seats. But knowing a theater that knows it can sell most of 3 or 4 weeks of a run because of its subscriber base, can take chances in its programming that you could, if you were 100% single tickets, you wouldn't necessarily be able to take, without losing a lot of money in certain cases. So I do think it creates boldness sometimes. And sometimes people feel like they got to cater their subscribers, and it can create carefulness. But a lot of times I think you think like, we've got a subscriber base, we can put that play on, and we've got an audience for it, even if we don't know how to market it to the entire world. We've got some people who are with us for the journey, and we can take a chance.
There are some specific things that, for too long, the Globe has gone to San Diego's Black and Brown communities and said, please buy a ticket when we've had a Black and Brown play. We need to not do that. We need to say, we want you here for all of our plays, and we need to stay in relationship with that community throughout, and not just for the August Wilson play that we're doing, right? We need to figure out how we're talking to communities, where we're reaching them, because they may not be in the same places that the white audiences are. The Globe is unbelievably good at selling tickets to white San Diego because we've had 85 years of practice. Of course we're good at it. So now we need to develop a brand new set of, not brand new, but a richer, deeper set of skills to recognize that there are all sorts of other communities that we haven't figured out quite how to communicate with in the same way. And then the second piece of this, and this is absolutely crucial, is that when we get a BIPOC member of the San Diego community to come to the Globe to see something, because we have excited them and we have made it interesting for them to want to come to Balboa Park, they have to have a wonderful experience, right? So that's everything. Who's tearing the ticket? Who's the usher? What's it been like to be shown to your seat? What do you see when you open the program? Do you feel constrained and shy and you're not allowed to react when you're sitting in the theater, right? There's so many pieces of this, because that we have seen is somebody who has said, okay, I'm going to go there, and then not had a good time. And then that's it. And not only are they not going to come back to the old Globe, they're not going to go to theater ever again, right? And that's where, decentering, if I can use a word that I've learned, right, in my work on this thing, I have spent my entire life going to the theater. I feel it's my place in this world, and decentering my experience of going to the theater to understand that we need to make space for others to have that experience and that connection is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial.
Barry, you said something about when people come into the theater and who they see, and it's kind of a perfect segue. I think when Freedom was on here as a guest, this is probably the first time we really dived into this about the pipeline, the pipeline in the theater. I think me and Freedom both, talked about, for us, there would be no working in theater because we needed to work. And I think one of the main things that I see is that we don't see a lot. When I first went to my first national conference for ticketing, which was actually here in San Diego, out of about 1,200 people, I could count the Black people on my hand. It was literally like 5. And one of them was Nikki Cooper, who used to run the box office at La Jolla Playhouse. You know what I mean? And it was because I didn't know anybody who looked like me who did what I did. I didn't know anybody in theater who was Black like me, a male, Black, big like me, who worked in theater, who did box office, who did ticketing, who did system administration, who did IT. I didn't know anybody, didn't know anyone to look up to see what this path was to walk. And one of the things we're talking about is the pipeline, as far as there's a lot of volunteer work and there's a lot of internship work, which is great. But I also feel like there's opportunities for us to open up positions in front of the house, and places like that, to where we could take young people, if they can go serve fries, they can come into the theater and learn how to usher. They can come into the theater and learn how to work behind the counter if they're not selling alcohol, if they're too young. They can learn these skills. And while they're learning these skills, they're also learning how to interact with people on varying financial levels. They're learning hospitality skills along with technical skills. What are your thoughts on ways and how we open up that pipeline to those who they can't afford to take an internship, but they're interested in working in theater, they're interested in learning the business? How do we go about opening up the pipeline to these young people who do want to be in this, but hey, you know what, I got to work though. I got bills to pay. Mom and dad ain't rich. They can't afford to send me here to do it for free. I need to get paid to do it, but I want to do it. How do we open that up? How do we widen that door?
Well, if I may, Ahmed, you know this, that in our strategic action plan is the action plan item, the goal of hiring young people, essentially, with a focus on people of color, to be in our usher corps and paying them to be there. So when people come to the theater, they see a diverse group of hosts, if you will, welcoming them, taking their seat, pouring them the Coke. That's just one tenet in our plan. And I look forward to that day, because I would love the idea that the people who welcome the audience to the theater look like the community of San Diego, and they don't yet.
Total. And Jeanette just said in the comments, paid internships, right? So I think you both said a version of this. We're going to shift away from unpaid internships so that every internship is paid starting as soon as we get back on stage. That's one thing. And it's also up into the step before that, commitment to sending theater into young people's lives, right? It's like whether it's the sort of Globe for All the Globe does, or the pop tour at the Playhouse. Like, there are, economically stressed schools that are not going to have the arts unless institutions like all of the ones that are on this call today are making a commitment to send art into the schools and creating that excitement and sparking the imagination, and then following it up on, there's also a career here to be had, and really recruiting there.
Yeah, I would add only this, that, if you read through the Globe's roadmap, 4 phases over many years, and you'll see that 80% of it are things that audiences won't see, right? So there's a lot of talk in it about what plays we're going to be doing, who's in those plays, what actors are in those plays, all of that. That's absolutely there, but it's like an iceberg. That there's a giant part of it that's not immediately visible, that has to do with who's working there. So indeed, no more unpaid internships, and real mentorships and real relationships with community-based organizations to say, here's what we're doing, and sharing skills and sharing knowledge, and, who's working backstage. And, the Globe is working with our colleagues here in the San Diego Theater and also in the other performing arts to go to the union, right? There's a stagehand union here in San Diego, gigantic, and often entry-level jobs that come through in backstage work. And we've all come together as a coalition to go to the union as a group of employers and say, let's work together. Let's figure this out. Let's diversify the population of the union, so that when we call the union hall to get our crew, we're seeing a more diverse pool. And that's a wonderful thing, where the entire city has come together, the convention center and the symphony and the opera and all the theaters to do this work. So much, and it keeps coming back to me to this question of systems, is about, like, how's the hiring done? Who's getting paid what? Are the pay scales equitable? How do we recruit? What skills are we privileging in an application process? The minute you say you have to have a college degree, you're separating out people who don't have a college degree. Well, can you credential life skills and say equivalent life skills qualify you perfectly for this job? Right? There's all that kind of stuff that's going to really change, check back in 3 years, 5 years, the theaters in San Diego are going to look massively different, not just on their stages, but throughout the institutions. And they just will.
I see a question in here from, I think your name is Rivian, and I will not butcher your last name, Rivian, and because I can answer this question. The Globe goes to schools, but not in the way that you might remember it. We have partnerships with several schools when we do our student matinees. We have pre-show workshops and post-show workshops in schools. We also have a rich partnership with some young schools in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego, where they come to the Globe and they do long workshops with us there. So yes, we do it, but I don't know the way that it was done before, but that's my specific area. So yes, we do.
Jacole and I talk a lot also about the sort of authenticity of the engagement, right? Trying to move away from transactional, we got to sell a ticket to the show, and move toward the idea that there's a longer term relationship and investment in each other, with all the partnerships that we're creating, and making sure that there's listening, that there's a commitment to each other that transcends the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that Barry said earlier, like that when you first entered into this conversation, sitting down with Freedom, it's like, all right, we got the fuel, let's do it. It's going to go. We're going to make the changes. It's going to happen. And just, it doesn't. It does. I mean, what's the old adage in business? You can have it good, you can have it cheap, or you can have it fast. You know, and really, if you're wanting to do this work, it's going to be slow and it's not going to be cheap. I mean, somebody put it in the chat. It's an investment into the community, and that's not just a time investment. You know, time and energy. That is money. That is reallocating resources that might go to a season show that might not be readily available at your theater, but a commitment to reallocating those resources to go in and have the conversations and compensating people for, because that's the other thing we do a lot of times is ask people for their expertise and then go, thank you, Black person, thank you, person of color, for solving our problem, and walk away. And now the idea of really making sure that that we're compensating the experts that we're bringing into the room. And so yeah, this is not cheap and this is not fast, and we're going to do it well.
Here, here.
I just want to briefly say, while we're continuing, I put it in the chat, but I want to open the room to some Q&A while we have a little time left. If you haven't asked a question yet, or if you've had a question in your mind, please put it in the chat right now, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. We are getting a little bit short on time. We're trying to go through the chat right now and see if there's something that we didn't ask yet.
This was the most active chat we have ever had on the show. I have never, woo! People are passionate with their fingers today. I love it.
Jacole, Freedom, have you seen anything in the chat?
I just remembered something else, though, to go back to Rivian's question that she asked about schools. We also have a few different Shakespeare. We have a summer Shakespeare program for kids to come to the Globe. We also have a theater design studio for kids to come and learn theater design work at the Globe. So they come out, and it's a 4-week program as well. And then we have a creative youth studio, which is an online professional development thing for kids to learn. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on with young people at the Globe.
I do want to address a statement by Catherine. Catherine Lewis said there's not enough women in this conversation. What is that about? Let's get into that. Let me take it broadly first. This is one episode. I encourage you to go back and look over the breadth of We Are Listening to see what is represented here. But let's talk about that question. What the screen you're looking at right now. I could talk. On my screen, on the top row is me, Freedom, and Jacole. We just represent the curation team here. But I think what you're seeing is exactly what we're talking about. We are looking at right now a room where we have 3 artistic directors that are white males. You know what I mean? And with me, Freedom, and Jacole on this team, it's an odd number. It was going to skew one way or the other.
Remember, but no, I do want to address this. I appreciate you saying that, but I want to address this. I will say that the theater arts in general have a lot. Like I'll say the Playhouse has a lot of women in leadership as far as people who are at that director level. A lot. That is not the norm. That is not the case. I remember very early on. Feeling real cocky and confident. I was having a conversation with our then managing director, Mike Rosenberg. And I said, y'all hired me for a reason. There's nobody better that you could have brought into this position in this moment right now. And it's a really good time to be a woman of color working in the arts. Like, I know I'm in a good place. And he said, yeah, but to what level? At what level is it advantageous to be a woman of color in the arts? Because again, we don't really talk about, we haven't addressed One Theater, One Story very much on this show in general, not on this episode at all. But that picture, that One Theater, One Story was supposed to be representative of all of the theaters in San Diego. And yes, there were some men there were some women represented on that, but it was very heavily skewed male. Sometimes at the artistic table, Sam, at the Rev, I was one of very few females. Before Patrice came on, it was me and Danielle that were really fighting for voices at that table. So yes, there is an issue with that. I noticed it very quickly when I was preparing for this show, realizing I'm going to be the only female voice on there. And I don't think that this ratio is all that skewed to and when you're talking about leadership.
You know, last fall, we promoted Ahmed to artistic associate, so he joins our artistic leadership team. And Patrice Amon, who identifies Latinx, to the team, and Danielle Ward, who identifies as a queer woman, to the team. And that table is now larger, and the voices are there, and we hear them, and they're potent, and they speak up. And Kim Heil is there as well. So, you know, it's the change is happening. Change is happening. Slow, it's slow. But we watched a video, our Vision Council watched a video the other day. And when we were done, it was a video on whiteness, I believe, was the title. I'm not sure that was it, but that's how I took it. It was an educational webinar video on sort of the principles behind white supremacy and how they infect organizations. And after it was over, we had a response to it, and the response to it was completely voiced by the people of color at the table. And it just happened that way. And I was happy for that, just listening. Barry said that a long time ago in this conversation, and that's where I find myself right now, is in a state of learning at this old age I am, at the state of learning and discovery of what is white supremacy? What does it mean? What are the systems? How do you become anti-racist? And that's why I look so much forward to this training with racial healing training with Sarah Bellamy that we're going to do.
I want to just ask this question because you're just touching on it, Sam. And this woman has asked this question twice now. It's in the chat. Deborah, she says, thanks so much for hosting this discussion. As a theater lover who is a white woman, I welcome hearing specific ways that I can be a strong anti-racist ally for my theater, and any suggested actions for my high school junior who's a self-proclaimed theater geek. Subscribe to the Globe. Try to get in. The applications are live for Summer Shakespeare Studio. Look for that. But to her, the first part of her question, what can good-hearted white people do to help you all move this thing through?
Well, you know, I can only go back to my own experience learning how to be brave about calling things out when I see them, right? Intervening in things that aren't right, intervening in systems that aren't right. And I think the thing that I would say to all of the constituents of the Globe are hold us to account. That's, you know, we are a community asset. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, which is a corporation chartered to provide a public benefit. To whom? To San Diego, right? And we have the idea that we're this city on a hill can't be real. It's got to be insist that we're transparent, insist that we're accountable. Let us know what you're seeing, applaud us when we're doing something that chimes with you, call us out when we're not. That's what I would say. If you're on the journey that we're on, which is to make the Globe an asset for all of San Diego, right? When we say Globe for all, that we mean it. Then you got to hold us accountable to the commitment that we're making. And I think that's the way to show love for all the cultural institutions of San Diego, who, by the way, are all on this journey in their own ways. So for folks that are like a ticket buyer, a subscriber, an occasional visitor, you know, you have immense power because this is a public institution. And so hold us to account.
You know, I wanted to add something too. For those who are watching this and you've watched for the first time, every time we have one of these episodes, like I learn so much from the guests. Like I learn so much in these conversations. We learn from each other, and there's a lot of comments and a lot of things in the comments. But I want to kind of go back to this thing that, you know, me and Jacole have had this conversation before, and I've had it with my other colleagues when we're talking about these issues of equity and inclusion and how we treat each other in the workplace. You know, of course, when I was joking about, I'm looking at the top row of me, Freedom, and Jacole on our group, you know what I mean? But I think it's important as we're going through all these things and we're learning that each one of us learns how we play a role in this. And one of the things I've always seen in these conversations that I take away from, and we've talked about this in artistic meetings, is that I can be whatever I have about me as being a Black man in this thing, but I always have to take that a notch further and recognize my privilege as a man and as a big frame man. So I've sat in meetings and understood and heard people say things that I'm like, oh, I know you got away with that because you're a dude. You got away with that because you're a man in this room. You got away with that because you can throw your weight around, and a lot of guys don't know it, but they physically throw their weight around. And I sometimes just said stuff just because I was the other big guy in the room and I just could. just to be like, you're not the only big person in this room. And I think that's important in these conversations. Freedom, telling you, like, I think that's important. We have to have that humility as we sit here and learn from each other. And even us as Black artists and workers and creators, we have to understand what is our role in pushing these things forward. We have three Black people on this call right now who we're avatars for people who don't speak up like us. We just happen to be very loquacious and very outspoken people that work in this thing. Like we just happen, yeah, you too. We just happen to be people who are very outspoken and we really speak up for ourselves and our colleagues, but everybody doesn't speak up like that. You know, everybody doesn't have the courage or thinks they're going to lose something if they do that. You know, we're just all either just, you know, too thick-headed or too dumb or too whatever. It doesn't matter. We're going to say it anyway. But I just wanted to take that moment to let, you know, for all of us to let that sink in, that when we're in this moment, we're all learning in this, and we're all looking at what's lurking inside to move this whole theater community forward, because that's what we are. We are a theater community, from the workers, from the board members, from the theater goers to everybody. We're all in this community, and I think that's really important to remember. Dia wants us to answer a question.
Yeah, I was going to say we are at time, but I'm seeing that coming into that. I think that the underline that I'm seeing in that question, if you all wouldn't mind just taking a moment to hit on, is local. Because there's broad strokes of supporting BIPOC artists and 50% and bringing everybody in. And I'm going to stop editorializing. The local. How are we making sure that we support the local BIPOC artists?
So can I just say that my top row is Ahmed, Freedom, and me. So I just want to. I like being in that row. So yeah, you know, we've made a commitment to an organization, San Diego Black Artists Collective, and I think that the connections between that group and the Globe are going to deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen over the years. I think the Globe's been on a trajectory of more and more San Diego artists showing up in our work. And we're very, very proud of that. Here's what I also think is that in the 8 years I've been here, I've seen tremendous growth and richness in the local San Diego ecosystem of theater makers. I think it's a very, very fertile time for local talent here. The richer the place gets, the more representative the three giant theaters in town get, the healthier the ecosystem is going to be, the more realistic it will become for an artist to say, I want to stay here and make a life and make a career. So again, it's one of the commitments that the Globe has made, and that's true to the Latinx community as well. We also know we have a gigantic Asian community. You know, once again, let's talk again in 5 years. I think it's going to look just massively different and richer and better.
80% of the actors that work at San Diego Rep are local. And as I said earlier, about 52% of the actors that work at San Diego Rep are BIPOC people. So you can do the math. And we have as you all know, we have a 28-year long festival, African American Performing Arts Festival called Kumbha Fest, which happens this month. And that we're entering our 5th year of our Latinx New Play Festival in the fall. And the people who work in those festivals are primarily local, as well as the actors on our main stage.
I want to say the same thing at the Playhouse. The festivals have tended to be like a real magnet. The WOW work and the site specific and the immersive are lean almost exclusively into kind of local artists. I also want to call out Jacole, who has been a consistent and potent advocate for casting local, for authentic connections to veterans and their playwriting, to so many different communities within San Diego. So I think a lot of the key here is advocacy and the commitment to the relationships. So thank you, Jacole, for all that you do about this question.
Look, you know what? We're at 7. We're at a little bit after 7 o'clock. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Gentlemen, I really do thank you for showing up and talking to us today. This has been a long time coming. But as what did Dia say the last couple of weeks, Jacole, that what matters is what can be measured. So you know, we'll all be looking at what's going on and see what we can measure a year from now and a year after that, year after that. And we'll just keep pulling the measuring tape out and see what happens and keep working towards that goal. Sam, Barry, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody, please make sure you come back and join us in 2 weeks on February 18th. The aforementioned Dahan Blevins will be joining us. We'll be talking about the Urban Warriors, and of course, I think it's the 29th, Sam? I think the 29th annual.
Is it now 29th? Okay.
29th annual Kumbha Fest coming up the weekend of February 27th. So please come back and join us and sign up for all of our other wonderful conversations. Jacole, again, thank you very much for being the co-pilot seat. That dude over there, Freedom, thanks, bro. Thanks for jumping in the car on this ride to the store, man. I appreciate it. I needed another person in the car on this one, man. Everybody, we're going to take off and sign up. And don't forget, you can catch replays of all these episodes on the Reps YouTube page, La Jolla Playhouse's YouTube page. You can also catch it in podcast form on Spotify and SoundCloud. So please go back, check out all of our other episodes, and we will talk to you guys in 2 weeks here on We Are Listening. Have a good night and a great weekend. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.